A refrigerator hums loudly in the forest, its door throbbing with a sickly light that seems to laugh silently. Sebastian Thompson ignores it, his fingers tracing the cold, precise grooves of a pocket watch spring. The air tastes of copper and old dust, thick with the weight of the facility's labyrinthine cave system, pressing inward like a fist. His heartbeat thrums in his temples, syncing with the accelerating tick of the clock he polishes, a wet paper tear vibration in his skull, sharp as a scalpel. The ear-splitting pressure drop hits him now, a physical shove behind his eardrums, making his teeth ache as the facility groaned around him. He doesn't look up. The scent of stagnant water and old wet fur, thick as riverweed, seeps from the tool case at his feet. He'd placed a dead fox inside earlier, its fur slick with dew, its small chest still rising with a faint, wet warmth. Hive alive, his mind whispered, a lie he clung to. Alive, the iron ring on his wrist, cold and heavy as a tombstone, bit deeper into his skin, tightening. He felt it like a second pulse, a cold counterpoint to the ticking. Peril approaches ere the ring seemed to whisper in his blood. He'd found the fox near the main lab's air vents, its eyes wide and glassy, yet its fur radiated a strange, damp heat. He'd picked it up, expecting only a corpse, but the warmth had seeped through his gloves, a feverish, impossible heat. Now, as he lifted the spring toward the light filtering weakly through a high, cracked vent, the ticking grew louder, faster. Tick, 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 a frantic, metallic staccato hammering against the cavern walls. It drowned out the distant, rhythmic thump-thumpy of the facility's failing air pumps, a sound like a slow, wet heart beating in stone. He knelt, the rough, gritty texture of the cave floor scraping his knees. The fox's fur, still warm, released a pungent, sour odor like waterlogged leaves left to rot in a cellar. It clung to his fingers, slick and cold beneath the faint, deceptive warmth. Why is it warm? The question echoed, sharp and useless. The ring dug in, a new line of fire beneath the metal. He tried to breathe, but the air tasted thick, like swallowing ash. The ticking surged, a jagged, dissonant rhythm now. Each ticked a shard of glass against his eardrums. It wasn't just getting faster, it was supine-shattering. The familiar sound fractured into something new, something grinding and relentless. Grind, 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 like 1,000 coffee beans being pulverized under a heavy stone mortar. The sound vibrating up his arms from the ring, from the ticking, from the very walls of the cave. The fox's fur smelled of stagnant water and old wet fur, and the grinding coffee beans were the only sound left in the world, the only thing he could hear as the ring bit deeper and the ticking became the grind. I stare into the cave wall's reflection, my breath fogging up the charred glass that separates me from whatever lies beyond. The grinding of coffee beans intensifies, a relentless, gritty symphony echoing through the facility, vibrating in my bones like some ancient machine awakening. The light flickers, casting grotesque shadows on the wall. I lean closer, squinting at what seems to be another face staring back at me. But it is not mine, not anymore. This face is gaunt, hollow-cheeked, eyes sunken and empty sockets gaping like twin caves. A chill sweeps through me, colder than the cave air, as realization dawns. That is my future self looking back at me. His mouth moves, forming words I can't hear over the grinding cacophony. His reflection seems to plead with me, hands reaching out towards me, but all I feel is a cold, numbing dread seeping into my core. The smell of old wet fur and stagnant water grows stronger, choking off any remaining air. I turn away from him, unable to bear the sight any longer. The clock's grind deepens, each grind resonating like thunder in this stone tomb. It feels alive now, malevolent, a heartbeat gone wild, pounding out of control towards some unseen climax. The ticking accelerates too, morphing into something wet and drag-like, echoing the sound of heavy footsteps slogging through muddy water. Fu-fu-fu-fuck. Suverb. Each beat feels like someone's dragging their fingers across damp leather, sending shivers down my spine. Future Sebastian slams his hand against stone. A single blood droplet appears on his knuckles, blooming like an obscene red flower in slow motion. It hangs there for what seems an eternity before gravity claims it, pulling it down into the abyss below, and then silence. The grinding stops abruptly. The ticking slows to a wet drag sound, echoing through the cave system like a dying heart's last gasps. Slew up, slew up. Each beat resonates with an eerie finality, each pief and taffeter of sound stretching out infinitely until they merge into one continuous note. A low, throbbing hum fills my ears, drowning out everything else. The blood droplet falls, and the world holds its breath as it waits for that wet, echoing tear to shatter whatever tenuous control I have left over reality. The air in the facility, S lowest chamber, is thick with the scent of damp wool, and something older, something that clings to the back of my throat like a half-swallowed tongue. My fingers trace the edge of the iron ring on my wrist, its surface slick with the same sweat that beads on my forehead. The pressure shifts again, a low fizzy in my ears like a balloon deflating, and I count the steps backward from the last marker, my boots sinking slightly into the cave's uneven floor. 3, 2, 1. The world tilts, just for a breath, and my stomach lurches with it. That S when I hear it. Not the grinding coffee beans. No, that S gone silent now, buried beneath something worse. A wet, tearing sound, like parchment being ripped apart by teeth that take quite teeth. My pulse hammers against the ring, and it tightens, biting into my skin. I don't look down, I don't need to. The pain is enough. Then, movement. The cat is already there, coiled in the shadows where the glow of the hairball spiderweb fails. Its body is a shifting mass of fur, too dense, too frumrung, and its face, if you can call it that, is a smooth, featureless void. No eyes, no mouth, just the faintest suggestion of stitches where features should be, like a mask sewn onto itself. It watches me, not with eyes, but with the absence of them, and I feel it in my bones, a pressure that isn't sea air but something thicker, something hungry. I reach for the pocket watch in my coat. The cat doesn't move. It doesn't need to. The watch is still warm for my body. The brass casing dull under my fingers, the glass face is cracked. The hands frozen at 3:47. I don't remember breaking it. But the cat knows. Its tongue, if it has one, flicks out, a pink blur of motion, and the watch sunder snapses, like a twig underfoot. The gears scatter, tiny metal teeth spinning into the dust. I don't flinch, I don't breathe. The phone is next. I pull it from my pocket before I realize I am doing it. The screen is still on, the time glitching between 3:47 and 12 o'clock. The cat has paw. If it has paws, brushes my wrist, and the glass shatters inward, not outward, the fragments dissolving into a fine grey powder that smells like burnt sugar. The phone melts in my hand, the plastic warping, the battery swelling like a bruise. The cat leans in, and I feel the heat of its breath, or what passes for breath, against my skin. Then it toofy takes it not with its mouth, not with its hands. The phone sinks into the fur, into the fun-wrongness of it, and the catty's body ripples, just for a second, like a stone dropped into still water. The screen flickers one last time, 3:47, and then it's gone swallowed whole. The spiderweb behind it pulses, a faint, sickly glow like mold under moonlight. The strands are made of hair, I realize now, human hair tangled and knotted into something alive. It sees, not with lungs, but with the slow, rhythmic shift of fibers, each strand twitching like a nerve. The smell hits me again, wet fur, stagnant water, the copper tang of something old and bleeding. I swallow. The cat's attention shifts. It knows I am counting. It knows I am measuring the pressure, the steps, the seconds. It wants me too. The grinding starts again, not from the machine, not from the beams. From the walls, the cave itself is wending grinding. The stone teeth of the ceiling shifting, scraping against something below. A low, wet twigurgle fills the air, like water draining from a sink that never empties. The sound climbs, faster now, the pitch rising until it not sound at all. But twigger pressure, pressing against my eardrums, my skull, the iron ring digging deeper into my wrist. I can breathe. The cat watches, waits. The dripping starts first, one drop, then another. The sound isn't water. It's something thicker, something that stretches before it falls. A slow, wet flink-plink that echoes through the chamber like a gunshot. I follow the sound to the ceiling, where the hairball spiderweb sags, a single strand unraveling into a thick, viscous thread. It hangs there, trembling, before it snaps. The drop hits the floor. It doesn't splatter. It fits Dixie, spreading in slow motion, a dark, glistening puddle that smells like iron and rot. The cat, as fur twitches, its body goes taut. Every strand of hair bristling, every stitch in its faceless skin pulling tight. The dripping accelerates, plink, plink. Asterisk, each drop is heavier now. The sound louder, the puddle growing, the stench rising. The pressure in my ears is unbearable. My vision swimming, The cat's body convulses, the fur rippling like waves, the spiderweb trembling above us. And then, the first drop hits the cat. It doesn't flinch, doesn't move. The liquid soaks into its fur, darkening it, turning it from gray to black. The strands clinging together like wet wool. The cat's body shudders. The spiderweb above us seemed to scream scene, not with sound, but with light. A burst of sickly glow that sears my eyes. The pressure in my ears explodes, and I fall to my knees, my hands pressing against the floor, against the stone, against the wrongness. The dripping stops. The grinding stops. The cat is still, and the world holds its breath. The air tasted of iron filings and something else, something faintly floral, like a funeral bouquet left too long in stagnant water. I shifted my weight, and the stone beneath my boots gave way with a soft crunch. Not a break, not a snap, but a yielding, as if the floor was packed with something. Yielding I hadn't noticed before, hadn't twin felt it before, but the entire chamber was subtly uneven, a slow, undulating swell beneath my feet. It wasn't the earth breathing, not exactly, but the sensation was close enough to send a tremor through my teeth. The spiderweb, or whatever mockery of a web it was, stretched taut between the stalactites, a charcoal filigree against the deeper black of the cave. It wasn't static. The strands pulsed, a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction that mirrored the ache in my wrist, the tightening of the iron ring. I focused on the hair, the sheer thvolofend of it, and the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just human hair. There were textures within the mass, coarse boar bristles, the fine down of birds, something slick and almost metallic. My gaze followed the thickest strand, a rope-like cable of woven hair, and it led me to the creature. It wasn't coiled now. Not exactly. It was assembling. From the depths of the shadows, it was pulling, twisting, manipulating the hair into something intricate, something horrifyingly familiar. A coil, a spring, the beginnings of a mechanism. It wasn't building a trap. It was building a clock. Each strand it worked with seemed to twibe a lead into the others, the colors merging into a single, greasy black. The air grew thick with the copper tang, the scent so potent it coated my tongue, leaving a metallic grit on the back of my throat. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt constricted, filled with dust and dread. The creature's movements were unsettlingly precise, not the fluid grace of a predator, but the jerky, deliberate motions of a clockmaker, each twist and turn calculated, each loop secured with an unnerving certainty. It didn't look at me, not with eyes, but I felt its attention, a cold, unwavering pressure that settled on my skin like frost. It knew I was watching. It wanted me to see. I risked a glance at the wall, searching for the source of the grinding. But it was gone silent. The cessation of sound was worse than the noise itself, a hollow absence that amplified the other sensations. The pressure in my ears, the subtle shift of the cave floor, the sickeningly sweet smell of decay. The mechanism grew, a complex tangle of hair and skin, slowly taking shape. It wasn't a clock as I understood it, not a device for measuring time, but something else. Something organic. The hair formed gears, not of metal but of woven strands, interlocking and rotating with a disturbing fluidity. Tendons stretched and contracted, mimicking the movement of muscles. It was a clock built from flesh, a timekeeping device powered by something alive. My fingers instinctively went to my coat pocket, to the smooth, cold metal of the pocket watch. It was still there, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling emptiness. It hadn't broken. Not exactly. It had simply stopped. Frozen at 3:47, a meaningless time, a phantom echo of a moment that never was. The creature continued its work, oblivious to my presence, lost in its macabre creation. The coil grew larger, more intricate, the movements faster, more frantic. The air vibrated with a low, rhythmic thrumming, a sound that resonated deep within my bones. Then the drag began. A slow, wet, rasping sound, like something heavy being pulled across stone. It wasn't the creature moving, not the mechanism turning. It was the cave itself, the rock itself. Or, rather, something twinned within the rock. Something shifting, stirring, awakening. The sound intensified, growing into a sustained drag, a wet, insistent pull that echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears, but one you felt in your teeth, in the marrow of your bones. It was a heartbeat, slow and sluggish, but undeniably present. A vast subterranean heart beating beneath the earth. The coil completed, the creature stepped back, and the mechanism pulsed. A single, deliberate beat. The hair strands tightened, the gears meshed, and the entire structure began to rotate. Slowly at first, then faster and faster. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and decay. The drag sound became a pulse, a slow, wet, dragging pulse. The hair yielded with a sickening softness, parting under my gloved hand like disturbed plumage. Not the crisp snap of dry strands, but a clinging, oily resistance. I peeled back the woven layers, each movement releasing a wave of the coppery scent, now so intense it felt like a taste fee, a metallic bloom on my tongue, the phantom tang of blood and old pennies. The air itself seemed to thicken, to solidify around me, pressing against my lungs. My wrist throbbed, a dull ache that resonated with the rhythmic pulse of the mechanism. The iron ring, cool moments before, now burned against my skin, a tightening pressure that felt less like constriction and more like recognition. The structure wasn't merely complex, it was deliberate. Each strand interwoven with a purpose, a horrifying geometry unfolding before my eyes. Not random chaos, but a calculated precision that suggested not just intelligence, but artistry. A perverse, grotesque artistry. The charcoal and ash palette of the cave seemed to concentrate within the coil, drawing the light into its depths, leaving only the faintest glimmer on the woven surfaces. I ran a fingertip along a particularly thick strand, and it left a smear of viscous residue, the texture of aged parchment. Then I found it. Nestled within the core of the mechanism, almost completely obscured by the hair, was a clock. Not a grand, ornate timepiece, but a small, pocket-sized object blackened with age and coated in the same greasy film as the rest of the structure. The casing was heavy, cold metal, and I recognized the style immediately. Fusée, a late 18th century fusée movement, the kind favored by watchmakers obsessed with precision. It was stopped, frozen. I carefully extracted it, the hair clinging to my gloves like cobwebs. The moment it was free, the ring around my wrist constricted further, a sharp, biting pressure. It wasn't pain, not exactly, but a warning, a cold, insistent urging to understand. The clock felt heavier than it should, the weight pressing into my palm. I turned it over, examining the face. The glass was cracked, spiderwebbed with fissures, but the hands were still intact, frozen at 3:47. A meaningless time, a phantom echo of a moment that never was. Or perhaps a moment that Twitty will be. The scent intensified, the metallic tang now overlaid with something else, a cloying sweetness like overripe fruit left to rot. It wasn't a pleasant decay, but a sickly, viscous decomposition, as if the air itself was putrefying. I tried to breathe through my mouth, but the stench clung to the back of my throat. My stomach churned. The pressure in my ears increased, a dull roar that threatened to drown out all other sounds. I tried to focus on the clock, to analyze the mechanism, to find some rational explanation for this bizarre tableau. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. The hair wasn't simply holding the clock in place, it was somehow integrated. With it woven into the gears, the strings, the delicate balance wheel. The hair was the mechanism, the hair foot voici, the time the ring tightened again, almost to the point of discomfort. It felt like a band of ice constricting, compressing. I glanced around the chamber, searching for the source of the grinding, but the silence was absolute. A hollow, oppressive silence that seemed to amplify the other sensations. The subtle shift of the cave floor, the throbbing ache in my wrist, the sickeningly sweet smell of decay. I ran a hand across the cold metal of the clock, tracing the outline of the case. The hair felt warm, not the warmth of life, but the retained heat of something recently disturbed. The texture shifted beneath my fingers, and I realized with a growing horror that the hair wasn't simply woven around the clock. It was simply woving into it. The strands were extending, reaching tendrils of darkness, probing the cracks in the casing, seeking purchase. I tried to pull it away to separate the hair from the metal, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the two were fused, bound together by some unseen force. The hair tightened its grip, and a faint tremor ran through the clock, a delicate vibration that resonated through my hand. And then I heard it, not a tick, not the crisp, rhythmic beat of a functioning clock, but a sigh. A soft, breathy exhalation, as if the clock itself was breathing. A whisper of sound barely audible above the roar in my ears. It wasn't the sound of gears turning, or springs unwinding. It was the sound of air escaping, of something dying. The sigh deepened, becoming a drawn-out, mournful exhale, and the clock, frozen for what felt like an eternity, began to shudder. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor, and then a single hesitant tick. A dry, rasping click like a bone cracking. Another and another. Faster now, the ticks merging into a rapid, frantic rhythm. The hair strands writhed, pulsing with a sickening vitality. The scent of wet fur sharpened, flooding my mouth with the taste of copper. The ring around my wrist tightened, completing the circle. The dead clock was breathing. The smallest gears resisted, their teeth gummed with the residue. I needed to rebuild, not repair, but sever-buildev. The clock's internal architecture was too compromised, too infused. My fingers, clumsy despite decades spent coaxing life back into broken mechanisms, fumbled with the miniature screwdrivers. Each turn of the tool sent a shudder through the casing, a vibration that echoed in the hollow of my skull. I had to be precise, deliberate. The air tasted of iron and something else, something sickly sweet that clung to the back of my throat, my own hair. It felt obscene, the act of offering a piece of myself to this thing. But the logic, as twisted as it was, held. The clock demanded completion. The hair was the missing component, the bridge between its frozen state and whatever purpose lay ahead. I severed the strands, the metallic rasp of the scissors a small, brittle sound in the cavernous space. Each fallen lock seemed to darken the air to absorb the meager light. The scent of wet fur, that persistent undercurrent, intensified. I worked slowly, meticulously weaving the strands into the exposed framework, not replacing what was lost, but tumbide adding to it. Extending the network, the hair accepted my offering, clinging to the blackened metal, intertwining with the existing mass. It wasn't merely a physical connection, it was an assimilation, a merging. A low thrum began to resonate within the clock, a vibration that matched the frantic beat of my own heart. The ring on my wrist, cold moments before, now pulsed with a warmth that bordered on feverish. The ticking started subtly, a hesitant click, then another, irregular at first, like a newborn's breath. I held my own breath, listening intently, trying to discern a pattern, a rhythm. The sound was not mechanical, not the clean, precise ticking of a well-maintained clock. It was organic, a pulse. The hair seemed to writhe, responding to the nascent rhythm, extending further, probing the casing, seeking new connections. I added more hair, thicker strands this time, coaxing it into the delicate balance wheel. The movement felt wrong. Not technically incorrect, but fundamentally wrong. As if I were violating some ancient law, disturbing a slumbering god. The air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. My vision blurred at the edges, and I had to blink repeatedly to clear my sight. The charcoal and ash palette of the cave seemed to deepen, swallowing the light, leaving only the faintest glimmer on the woven surfaces. The ticking grew faster, more insistent. It wasn't simply matching my heartbeat now, it was sieve-leading it. My pulse quickened, mirroring the frantic rhythm of the clock, until I felt as if my heart would burst. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple, stinging my eye. The scent of decay intensified, laced with a new, acrid odor, footy ozone perhaps, or something burning. The creature, or what remained of it, stirred. A slow, deliberate movement, a shifting of weight. It hadn't moved since I'd begun, remaining a silent, watchful presence in the periphery of my vision. Now, a tendril of hair thicker than my arm reached out, extending towards the clock. Not to destroy, not to impede, but to join. The strand moved with a fluid grace, undulating like a serpent, its surface shimmering with an oily sheen. I didn't flinch, I didn't react. I simply watched, fascinated and horrified, as the tendril touched the clock, melding with the existing mass. The hair fused, becoming indistinguishable, a single pulsating entity. The ticking reached a fever pitch, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The ring around my wrist constricted, a band of ice tightening around my bone. And then, a single strand detached itself from the mass, a slender, almost invisible filament. It floated, suspended in the air, drifting towards me, towards the ring. It landed, softly against the cold metal, a single strand of hair resting within the curve of the iron. The ring didn't tighten. It breathed. Not a mechanical click, not a grinding of gears, but a sigh, a wet, rasping exhale, as if the iron itself had come alive. The sound was barely audible, a whisper of air against my skin, but it resonated deep within my bones. A wet whisper, a promise. The filament of hair against the ring was too perfect, too for right, as if it had always belonged there, waiting. I exhaled through my teeth, the breath hot and shallow, and pressed the tip of my thumb into the iron. The metal was cool at first, but the moment the hair made contact, it began to soften, to yield, as though the ring itself were melting. A slow, deliberate unraveling, like thread pulled from a spool. The scent of stagnant water sharpened, thickened, pressing against the back of my throat. Not water from the cave's pools, but something older, something twin-breathing. The damp rot of buried things, the scent of a corpse left too long in the dark. My fingers trembled, not from fear. From anticipation, the ring expanded, not outward but twinward, swallowing the hair like a mouth. The metal sighed, a wet, grinding exhalation, and the strand vanished into the curve of the iron as if it had never existed. The air rippled, not with heat, but with the unnatural shift of something solid becoming liquid and back again. My scalp prickled, the skin beneath my fingers tightening, contracting as though pulled by an unseen hand. The cat watched from the shadows, its featureless face tilted at an impossible angle, as if listening to a sound only it could hear. I didn't look away. The ring pulsed once, twice, a slow, deliberate throb. Then the pain came. Not a sting, not a prickle, but a deep, knowing ache, as though my scalp had been split open from within. My breath hitched. The hair was being drawn strand by strand into the iron. The tearing sound was worse than any scream. It was the sound of flesh parting from bone, of roots wrenched from the earth, of a scream that never left the throat. It echoed in my skull, a wet, tearing whisper, and I could feel it, the ring pulling, the iron hungry. I should have stopped. I should have torn the ring from my wrist, shattered it against the cave floor, burned it in the flickering light of the dying lantern. But my hands moved on their own, guided by something older than reason. The ring was no longer a tool. It was a free-living thing, and it wanted more. The cat's claws clicked against the stone, a dry, rhythmic staccato. It didn't move closer. It didn't need to. The air between us thickened, pressing down like a physical weight. The scent of wet fur coiled around me, thick and suffocating, and I realized too late that the creature in the shadows wasn't just watching. It was offering. The ring tightened, not painfully, deliciously. The iron warmed against my skin, the heat seeping into my veins like brandy, smooth and intoxicating. My vision blurred at the edges, the charcoal walls of the cave bleeding into the ashen glow of the lantern. The ticking of the clock had stopped. The ring was the only sound now. The slow, wet suck of hair being pulled from my scalp, the rhythmic suffocating of the iron expanding, the cat's breath, shallow and amused. From the dark. I didn't resist. The first strand came free with a sound like wet parchment splitting. The second followed, thicker, and I gasped, not from pain but from the frightness of it. The ring drank deeply, and the ache in my scalp became something else entirely. Foot to a fresher, a slow creeping warmth spreading from my roots to my bones, a fire that burned without consuming. The cat's eyes, if it had eyes, would have been on me. I knew it. I felt it. The third strand broke free, and the ring shuddered. The iron was full. It was sooty happy, and now it wanted more. My fingers found the cat's fur, soft, damp, put alive, and I didn't hesitate. The blade of my knife was already in my hand before I knew I'd moved. The first cut was shallow, a thin line of blood welling against the cat's flank. The scent of copper filled the air, sharp and metallic, cutting through the damp rot. The cat didn't flinch. It didn't mewl. It simply watched again, its featureless face tilted, as if waiting for permission. I cut deeper. The fur parted like water, the blade sliding through the damp strands with a sickening French liquidy. The cat's breath hitched, not in pain but in hoodie anticipation. The ring pulsed, the iron hungry for more, and I pressed my palm against the wound, pressing the fur into the ring's waiting mouth. The iron sucked, a wet, grinding sound, and the fur disappeared into the curve of the metal, absorbed, the consumed. The cat's body twitched, not in fear, in 40 ecstasy. The ring was full now, round and heavy against my wrist, pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm. The cat's fur was gone, replaced by the scent of something older, something fumen. The air hummed with the sound of grinding coffee beans, the rich, bitter aroma filling my lungs, making my head spin. And then the tearing began again, not from the cat, not from the ring. From Tintween Mime, the hair still damp, still alive, lay coiled in my palm like a serpent's tongue, thick and black as the oil slick beneath a candle's flame. I exhaled through my teeth, the breath curling into the damp air, and pressed the strand against the brass gear of the clock's mechanism. The ticking had slowed to a whisper, a dying heartbeat, But the moment the hair touched the rusted edge of the pendulum, the rhythm shifted Dev. Not a return to life, something worse. The metal groaned. A sound like a man's voice stretched too thin, and the hair pulse-died, darkening at the edges, as if absorbing the clock's essence. The cat watched from the corner of the chamber, its featureless face tilted just enough to catch the flicker of the lantern's light. No eyes, no mouth, only the suggestion of a void where features should have been. It didn't blink. It didn't need to. The air between us was thick with the scent of old wet fur, the kind that clings to a coat left too long in a damp cellar, the kind that smells like the memory. I should have known better. The hair slipped into the gear's teeth with a sound like wet parchment tearing. The clock shuddered, the brass twisting inward, not breaking. Molding the pendulum lengthened, the weight of it pressing against my fingers, and I could feel the timepiece breathing, inhaling the hair like smoke, exhaling it as something denser, something heavier. The ticking didn't return, it 20 deepened. A slow, grinding throb, the kind of sound that vibrates in your bones. The cat's claws skittered across the stone. I didn't look down. The key, my key, the one that fit the door to the surface, the one that fit the lock on my workshop, lay half buried in the dirt, glinting dully in the lantern's light. It had been there when I woke. It had been food move death. The cat's tail flicked, a dry, rhythmic fruffy than I knew. It had dragged it here, not to give it back to fit the offer. The ring on my wrist pulsed, not the iron, not the hair. The featureless I reached for it. My fingers brushed the stone cold and slick with something dark, not water, not dirt. The key was featureless, not with moisture but with the same thick, clinging dampness as the hair, as the fur, as the fubby thing in the dark. I picked it up, and the metal was warm, too warm as if it had been sitting in a hearth. The cat's breath hitched, not a sound but a shift in the air, a pressure against my skin like the press of a mouth against glass. The key was suvan wrong. The teeth of the bow were too smooth, too furf and even, like teeth filed down by something with no hands, only through pressure. I pressed it to the ring, nothing. The iron didn't resist, it didn't yield-eyed, it twined opened. A slow, wet twinklick, like the sound of a hinge in a door that shouldn't open. The ring split not along its seam, but twindward, the metal peeling back like the petals of a flower, revealing a hollow center dark and glistening. The key slid inside with a sound like a knife through fat, the metal sued rinking, the key's shape, the key's suedy weight, the key's suedy weight, the key's suedy memory. The cat's claws dug into the stone. The ticking of the clock was gone. In its place, a sound like grinding coffee beans, slow at first, then faster, the grains pressing against the blade pressing against the beans screaming. The ring closed too, not with a snap, with a sigh. The metal sighed, a long, wet exhalation, and the key was gone. Not melted, not dissolved. Thompson died. The ring was full now. Round, heavy, hungry, the cat's breath was a storm against my neck. I turned. The lantern light caught the cat's face, if it had a face, and for the first time I saw it. Not the void, not the absence. A porty mouth without lips, without teeth, just a dark, wet hole, and it was smiling. The grinding started again, not from the beans, from the wiring. The metal groaned, a low internal complaint, and the ring yielded with a sigh that wasn't air, but something thicker. The charcoal gray stone floor felt slick beneath my boots, coated in a film I hadn't noticed before, a residue that smelled of iron and something else, something vaguely floral, like a funeral bouquet left too long in the rain. The grinding noise intensified, no longer emanating from the ring itself, but resonating through, it vibrating up my arm into my teeth. It wasn't the sound of gears or stones or metal on metal. It was the sound of something being unmade. The air tasted of static. A pressure built behind my ears, a dull ache that spread to my temples. It wasn't the pressure of the cavern walls, but something internal, as if my skull were shrinking. The cat, still in the periphery, shifted its weight, the stone beneath its paws barely audible. It didn't watch me, not precisely. It watched the feathering shuang. It had been watching the ring since I'd first touched the hair, since I'd begun to unravel whatever clockwork horror this place contained. The ring's surface rippled, the iron distorting, not melting, but toothy unfolding. The metal seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a slow, agonizing rhythm. The grinding reached a fever pitch, then abruptly stopped. A silence descended, so complete it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I held my breath, afraid to break the stillness, afraid to hear what would come next. Then the tearing, a sound like wet parchment splitting, but deeper, more resonant. Not a single tear but a cascade, a ripping of layers like peeling back skin. The sound echoed off the cavern walls, but it wasn't an echo, not exactly. It was a replication, a mirroring, as if the stone itself were tearing along with whatever was emerging from the ring. The smell intensified, the floral scent now cloying, suffocating, mixed with the metallic tang of blood. A shape began to form within the ring's hollow center. It wasn't solid, not at first. Just a shifting darkness, a swirling mass of shadows, like ink dispersing in water. The darkness coalesced, thickened, taking form, and the grinding started again, a low rumble that vibrated in my bones. The texture of the air changed, it became viscous, heavy, like wading through treacle. I could feel it clinging to my skin, coating my lungs, making it difficult to breathe. The shape within the ring grew, pushing against the iron, straining the metal, until a hand emerged, pale and slick fingers elongated and unnaturally flexible. Then a wrist, an arm, a shoulder, and a face. The charcoal light from my lantern caught the features, and I stumbled back, a choked gasp escaping my lips. It wasn't a monster. Not in the way I'd imagined. It was me, my face, but wrong, distorted. The skin stretched taut over the bone, the eyes hollow and black, the lips pulled back in a rictus grin. The hair, the same thick, black oil slick I'd found coiled in my palm, framed the face plastered to the forehead, dripping onto the stone. The skin was the same pallor as the cavern walls, the same gray as the iron ring. The creature stepped out, pulling itself free from the metal as if it were shedding a shell. The tearing sound, now a heartbeat, pulsed in my ears. It didn't move like me. It flowed, a liquid imitation, its limbs bending at impossible angles, its gait unsettlingly smooth. It tilted its head, the movement mirroring my own, and a voice, my voice but fractured and hollow, echoed in the cavern. You shouldn't have. The cat's claws scraped against the stone, a frantic, desperate sound. It was trying to reach me, to warn me, but it was too late. The creature extended a hand, the fingers brushing against my arm, and a coldness seeped into my bones. A coldness that wasn't temperature but absence. It smiled, and the tearing sound intensified, becoming a frantic, desperate rhythm. The heartbeat, my heartbeat. Or was it? The creature's heartbeat. It was impossible to tell. The two were merging, blending into a single, terrifying pulse. The smell of wet fur and stagnant water filled my lungs. The ring, empty now, lay discarded on the stone, a silent witness to the horror unfolding. The creature took a step closer, and I knew with a sickening certainty that I wasn't looking at a reflection. I was looking at my future. The ring felt like a dead thing in my palm, cold and heavy as a fallen star. I'd held it too long, let the scent of wet fur and stagnant water seep into my pores, a smell that clung like regret. The ticking had stopped hours ago, but the pressure in my skull remained, a dull throb behind my eyes. I turned the ring over, studying the iron surface that now seemed to breathe. It wasn't just a ring, it was a wound in reality, and I was its needle. The cavern walls, once rough-hewn stone, now resembled charcoal smudged by rain. My lantern light, usually sharp, fractured against the surface, casting jagged shadows that felt like they'd been torn from the stone itself. The air tasted of copper and old dust, thick enough to coat my tongue. I raised the ring, its iron edges biting into my skin. Just punch it, make it stop. I slammed it into the wall, not a crash, but a wet slap, like driving a nail into rotten wood. The iron met stone with a sound like a sack of wet laundry hitting the floor. A low, resonant threck that vibrated up my arm into my teeth. The grinding noise I'd heard for hours ceased abruptly, replaced by a silence so absolute it felt like the walls were holding their breath. Then, the charcoal. It wasn't just the walls turning gray. The floor did it first, the stone beneath my boots darkening, spreading like spilled ink. It felt slick, oily, coated in that same residue from the ring iron and floral decay, like roses left too long in a mortician's hands. I stumbled back, the lantern light flickering erratically as the walls absorbed it, turning matte, ashen. The cat stood perfectly still in the periphery, its featureless face tilted, no mouth, no eyes, just smooth, pale stone. It didn't move. It didn't need to. I looked at my hands. They were gray. The lantern's light barely touched them, as if the color had leached into my skin. The ring lay on the floor empty, the iron dull and lifeless. Had stun, had relief, cold and sharp, pricked my chest. I took a step toward the exit, the charcoal floor sucking at my boots with a sound like wet paper tearing. The cat didn't watch me. It watched the spot where the ring had been. I walked. The wall wasn't stone anymore. It was soft, yielding like ash, the color of a dead man's skin. My shoulder met it with a sound like a sigh, not impact. I pushed forward, the charcoal yielding beneath my fingers, cool and smooth as wet clay. The lantern slipped from my grasp, hitting the floor with a soft den. No clatter, just the sound of something heavy and dead landing. The cat didn't move. It didn't need to. I walked into the wall. The silence pressed in, thick and wet, like the air in a sealed tomb. Then, cutting through it, the sound of a single grinding coffee bean, slow and deliberate, the dry, gritty rasp of one seed being crushed under a stone. The sound lingered, sharp and final, as the charcoal floor swallowed me whole.